I love unlockables, and judging from the view counts on these YouTube videos, I'm not the only one. A few weeks ago I finished playing through Ghost of Tsushima, and I'm the type of person that likes to do everything in these giant open world games. Unfortunately, since they take so long to beat, it often results in burnout, and I'll end up taking a break for a couple of days here and there throughout my playthrough. That moment was vastly approaching at around the 20-hour mark until I did a side mission and unlocked the dart gun. Initially I'd planned on calling it a night once I finished the mission, but with a new weapon it was time to wreak havoc. I was immediately reinvigorated. I ended up playing for an additional 2 hours that sitting, and it got me thinking, why do I like unlockables so much? I have 200 hours in Mortal Kombat 11 and have not once played against another person. Aside from the 10 hours spent playing through the story, I've basically been exclusively in Towers of Time getting new gear, costumes, and brutalities for my characters. That's about 8 days spent solely on making my characters look pretty.
Stop it. Get some help.
Franchises like the beloved Monster Hunter series have entire gameplay loops based around unlocking stuff for your character, so there's gotta be some sort of mystical reason why they're so enticing. The goal for this video is to take a deeper look into the ongoings of unlockables and hopefully find out why we as gamers like them so much. There's a lot to cover, so sit back, relax, and let's talk about the art of unlockables. Okay, so let's start off by defining an unlockable. It may seem tedious, but sometimes there's a thin line between unlockable and collectible, and we aren't here to talk about collectibles yet.
Steaming bowl of foreshadowing.
I consider an unlockable to be anything initially unavailable that becomes accessible after a specific task is performed. Ideally, they should have some sort of impact on gameplay, otherwise it's probably a collectible. Achievements, concept art, and soundtracks being a few exceptions. Collectibles usually kinda just sit in your inventory once you've gotten them and don't really affect the gameplay experience. For instance, in Ghost of Tsushima, crickets would be a collectible, but the songs that you get for collecting them would be an unlockable. There's a bit of gray area with things like catching wild Pokemon or getting new cards in Yu-Gi-Oh! Since both series have collecting baked in as a concept, but in general, I think this definition covers it. During my extensive research, I've come to the conclusion that unlockables will always fall under at least one of 3 distinct categories. Let's take a look at each of them.
If it's free, it's me, and I don't turn down nothing but my collar. And third, don't act like you don't like free cheese just because this white child standing here. Fuck her.
Yeah, fuck me.
First up are the freebies, the stuff that's literally just given to you. These are the least fun of the bunch, but they aren't without their charm, and I do think they're worth talking about. You're most likely to see a freebie at the beginning of a game as a means to kickstart your adventure. Odds are that they'll either be given to you by an NPC or laid out on a path that you need to take in order to complete the game. Starter Pokemon and insert spoiler here in The Last of Us 2 would be great examples of freebies. This method is almost always used to introduce a mechanic or item necessary for progression near the beginning of the game if the player doesn't outright start with it. I mean, how are you supposed to have a Pokemon battle if you don't have any Pokemon to battle with? The majority of unlockables that you'll get just for playing through a story fall under this category, and even side quest rewards can squeeze their way in if there isn't a noticeable change in gameplay required to complete them. Fetch quests and the like might try your patience, but they likely aren't big enough departures from what you're probably already doing to fall into the next category.
M'Baku, what are you doing here?
It's challenge day. I, M'Baku, leader of the Jabari
I accept your challenge.
Challenge unlockables are the most common and versatile of the 3. As the name would imply, there has to be some sort of apparent challenge for an unlockable to fall under this category, the most prevalent example being boss battles. It's pretty common practice to lock a powerful weapon or ability behind a boss, sometimes one needed for progression. Metroidvanias are especially known for gatekeeping important items or mechanics behind bosses, often flashing items or routes that are unavailable to the player when they first run into them, only to become accessible after a specific boss is beaten and their item is claimed. A challenge unlockable will probably require you to display a mastery of the game's mechanics, like in Ollie Ollie 2, where completing all of the objectives for a stage unlocks a much harder and completely different pro version of it. You're literally missing out on half of what the game has to offer by not unlocking these stages, so there's a real push to get those mechanics down pat. I would also put the hidden unlockables that you have to go out of your way to look for in this category, the challenge being that you have to find them. On their own, I would say that challenge unlockables have the potential to be the most satisfying of the 3. There's nothing quite like finally beating a boss that's been kicking your ass for hours or unlocking an exceptionally hard achievement. I spent 3 whole days trying to get Lucio's The Floor is Lava achievement when Overwatch first came out, and I can still remember literally shaking when I finally got it. I'm sure I don't need to tell you that I was flexing that pixel spray at the start of every game.
Look at it! Look at it! Look at it! I want all of you to look at it!
Finally, we've come to the black sheep of the family and final category, the grinds.
Can you do a thingy on that rail?
It's called a grind, bro.
So can you do a grindy thingy now?
Wow. He totally bailed.
Ah, I didn't get his autograph.
Grind unlockables aren't necessarily hard to get, but instead require some sort of time sink to acquire. Usually the time is spent farming a specific aspect of the game, whether it be rare materials, currency, or experience. There's a lot of negativity about grinding in video games, but it can be done right. I'm of the opinion that if your core gameplay is fun enough to keep players engaged, there's nothing wrong with a little long-term incentive. It's also important to note that grinds don't have to be as long and arduous as the term initially implies. And personally, I don't think the grind starts until a player consciously starts to think about it, by which point the game has already failed at keeping the player involved. Most of the time, the thing that you're grinding is something that you're already naturally doing. You're always collecting coins in Odyssey, so it's possible that you won't have to do any extra work to unlock a costume that you want from the shop. The same goes for buying items from Nico and DMC5. I don't even know where these points came from in The Last of Us 2, but I guess I'll get some concept art. Basically anything that you craft or buy with in-game currency falls under this category, but skill points, items, and new moves earned from leveling up in games with experience systems count too. To play devil's advocate, grinds have a for a reason.
I'll throw myself out.
Particularly in online multiplayer games. This is where we bring up the inevitable topic of microtransactions, as these unlockables are the most prone to be affected by them. Some companies will purposely make unlocking requirements too grindy in an attempt to push players into shelling out real money to skip the grind. The 2K series is notorious for painfully slow leveling paired with an option to buy the currency needed to level up your player. Gigantic air quotes around option if you couldn't hear them. You're probably looking at around 40 hours minimum just to get your character to a decent enough level to play online with people who are willing to pay up and max out their players day one. Now think of any game that has a battle pass, and I'm willing to bet my left nut that there's an option to buy tiers for it instead of leveling it up the normal way. Admittedly, the experience needed to max out a battle pass is usually pretty fair for how long they're active, but there is still an argument to be made for people who legitimately don't have the time to grind them out. Something unique to the online multiplayer environment is the social pressure that comes with your character and gear being broadcast to everyone that you're playing with. Many of the games are designed in a way that players who have clocked in tons of hours and worked their way up the ladder will clearly look better than someone who's just starting. And in some extreme situations, players might be ridiculed or outright avoided for being low level or having weak gear.
You will queue up and you will be matched with some random person. They can see your level and your equipment, so at that point, they will leave. Then you'll queue up again, and the next person will leave, and the next person, and the next person, and so on. And so on.
And while I hopefully don't need to tell you how whack it is that kids are literally being bullied for using default skins in Fortnite, it's all the more reason to skip the grind by spending real money when the option's available. Keep in mind that none of these categories are mutually exclusive from one another. The survival mode Bloody Palace is unlocked by beating the Devil May Cry games on normal difficulty, and you can argue that it's both a challenge and a freebie unlockable, since it's given to you for reaching a part of the story but also technically locked behind beating the final boss. While on their own, challenges are usually the most satisfying of the three, paired with a moderate grind, the satisfaction upon completion is unmatched. You're rewarded for skilled play and hours clocked at the same time, and it all kind of just compounds into a moment of bliss, relief, and contentment when you finally get what you're working for. As long as both the grind and challenge aspects are reasonable, it's a pretty surefire way to keep players coming back. Now that we've defined an unlockable and looked at the three variations, let's look at a couple more use cases in depth. After new players get accustomed to the mechanics and feel of a game, many of them will find a comfort zone and start only playing in the same specific manner. We're talking about the people that use the same 3 guns in Call of Duty or pick the same character every match in a fighting game. There's nothing inherently wrong with playing this way, but it can lead to not experiencing everything a game has to offer. Enter unlockables, a fantastic way to get players out of their comfort zone. Rocksmith 2014 does a really clever thing with its unlockables, since the devs seemingly know that the majority of people will probably jump right into learning songs and never become fully acclimated with any of the other helpful features the game has. There's a completely optional mission chain that stands in for traditional tutorialization. It introduces minigames and features that are extremely useful for beginners and pros alike practicing their technique. By following the missions, you'll learn how to use things like the tone designer, which changes the sound of your guitar. In session mode, where you're free to strum away to your heart's content, and an automated band will keep pace with you.
That's all you get for free.
Along the way, you'll unlock cosmetic items like amp colors and inlays for your on-screen guitar, and even new songs to play once you get deeper into the missions. Unlockables can also be used as a way to add replay value to a game. I mean, the entire concept of New Game Plus is based around the idea that it might be fun to go back and shit on a boss that was giving you a hard time with all of your weapons and upgrades intact. The Hitman series already has levels that are expressly meant to be played through multiple times, but by playing through a stage enough to increase its mastery, you'll unlock new gear and points of interest, giving you even more ways to creatively kill your targets and get out unnoticed. Just like in Hitman, simply getting to the end of a level in Super Meat Boy usually isn't that tricky. The real challenge comes from finishing a level quickly enough to get an A rank or after collecting a badge in a really tough spot, which unlock harder versions of the stage and characters respectively. If you want to go for those bonus objectives, you'll be replaying levels countless times as you get a feel for the momentum and timing required to land those really tricky jumps. This particular example also loops around into itself because a bandage or A rank that's tough to get with Meat Boy could potentially be easier with a different character. So when a particular level is giving you a really hard time, it might be a good idea to collect enough bandages in other levels to unlock a new character and come back later. Unlockables can even be used to give a sense of progression for games that otherwise wouldn't have any. This seems to be the go-to method for multiplayer games. For example, everything that happens in a match of Valorant is contained within that match. You won't start the next game with any advantage or disadvantage based on how you previously did. This is no doubt good for balancing, but it also means that players don't really have anything to work toward. To solve this, Riot has made it possible to unlock characters and minor cosmetics by gaining experience, which you earn just for playing. You're still gonna have to come out of pocket if you want the really good stuff though. Along the same vein, Spelunky 2, like all traditional roguelikes, also has no elements that persist between runs, but players that are willing to go out of their way and potentially waste those crucial resources will find new playable characters stuck in coffins sprinkled throughout the different biomes. As an added bonus, unlocked characters will populate the hub world, making this progression method even more tangible. This segues perfectly into one of the biggest issues with unlockables, being that they shouldn't be the only driving force behind playing. At the end of the day, you should want to play a game because it's fun, not just to unlock stuff. Historically, I've fallen into the habit of playing a game solely for the purpose of unlocking content more times than I care to admit, especially ones with battle passes. I'll grind battle passes to max level and then stop playing the game altogether until the next season, while I'll repeat the cycle. This isn't something that I ever thought of as an issue until I realized that I had 8 days clocked in Modern Warfare 2019's multiplayer, and I don't like that game. But you know what I do like? Pretty skins, watches, characters that I can't even really see because it's first person.
What you just said is one of the most insanely idiotic things I have ever heard.
And remember that 200 hours that I have in Mortal Kombat? Probably half of that has been my AI playing through towers to unlock stuff for me.
You lied to me.
I did. I lied big time to you.
I actually really like Mortal Kombat though, so it's not as bad as Modern Warfare. But all of that is to say that it is a real issue, at least in the scope of gaming. So how do we stop this? Well, I think it's important to ask yourself if you're really having fun, and if not, play a different game. After spending 8 days of my life playing a game that I didn't really like, when Cold War came out and I wasn't crazy about its multiplayer either, I was like,
there's a lot to see in this life. Not wasting it here.
It may be equally important to gauge whether or not what you're working toward is actually worth your time. Back when Street Fighter V first came out, you had to beat 90 waves of survival over the span of 3 difficulties to unlock all of the colors for a costume. 2 important notes about what I just said. Each difficulty option would unlock its own set of colors, so you couldn't just hop into the hardest mode and get all of them. Secondly, and this is the real kicker, you only unlocked colors for the costume that you were wearing during that specific session. So if you bought a cool new costume and wanted all of the colors for it, you had 90 waves of survival to look forward to, regardless of whether or not you'd already done it for that character. It goes without saying that this was absolutely outrageous, especially compared to Street Fighter 4 when you got colors at the end of a match just for playing a character. Rightfully so, players complained, and eventually Capcom made colors purchasable with in-game currency. This is an extreme example, but if you find yourself losing hours trying to unlock something as insignificant as colorways, it might be worth considering moving on to something else. The other argument I've come across during my extensive research,
Stop the cap.
is that players shouldn't be forced to unlock content from a game that they've already paid for, and should be given an option to jump in where and with what they want. This could cause issues with multiplayer games, but there is an argument here for single player experiences. While I enjoy the wonder that comes from unlocking new content, there are players that want to boot up a game and immediately start playing around with everything available. This used to be a pretty common option with cheat codes back in the day, but I don't even remember the last time I played a game that has cheat codes. It definitely wouldn't be something for me, but I'm all about player choice, and I think it'd be great for more games to have an unlock unlock everything option available. After all, we play games to have fun, and if that means starting the game with invincibility and a grenade launcher, you should be able to play that way. Okay, so let's circle back to the question at the beginning of the video and try to figure out why we like unlockables so much. I think it stems from the notion that we as players like being tangibly rewarded for an accomplishment. From something as simple as talking to the right NPC to wasting 3 days of your life trying to get a stupid achievement.
Look at it!
There's a certain positive feedback that comes from seeing something that you want behind a roadblock, working toward getting over that hurdle, and eventually, hopefully, achieving it that just isn't found anywhere else. And although we've unfortunately reached an age where companies might instead opt to put additional content behind paywalls, I really hope that they never fully go away. From cosmetic items used to visually announce your skill or dedication to a game, to modifiers that can completely change the gameplay experience, the spectrum is wide and varied, but as far as I'm concerned, every last one of them is welcome. I know this is a little different from what I usually post on the channel, being about a concept rather than a specific game, but you can let me know if you liked it by liking or disliking the video, and if you did like it, consider subscribing to the channel for more like this. Tell me about some of your favorite unlockables and achievements down in the comment section below. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.